Welcome back, everyone. We are resuming the lecture on chapter 11. Okay, so we are moving along through the management process. And so at the beginning of the semester, we began with the planning process. And as you recall, we began by creating a strategy based on the vision, mission, and values of the company. And from that, we were able to develop a strategy that sets the direction that the company is headed in. And then in the next section of the management process, organizing, we recruited employees to carry out that plan, and we set up an organizational structure to support that. And so now we are beginning this third process of this third section in the process of management called leading. And in this section, we're going to talk about ways in which we can motivate those employees that you recruited so they can accomplish the tasks they need to accomplish in order to achieve the goals and objectives of the company. So just as a quick review, so we began, so in this section, the way in which we are going to motivate and direct employees is by paying attention to the individual differences that exist among them. And so that is really the central focus of this chapter, chapter 11. It looks at the individual differences of the employees and looks at how those individual differences affect their performance and ways in which you can manage for that. And so some of the individual differences that we looked at in the first half of this lecture were personality, and personality is the persistent characteristics that define someone's identity, right? And we recognize 5 dimensions of a person's personality that the scientific process has established through countless studies. And one of those dimensions, conscientiousness, I sort of emphasize as being the most important because it's the most highly correlated with employee effectiveness, with employee performance. And so one way you can manage for this, obviously, is selecting candidates, selecting employees to hire that have certain personality traits that you know correlate well with performance, right? So you want to hire employees that have a high degree of conscientiousness and score low on neuroticism, that they are have a high degree of emotional stability. Now, the question is, how do you do that? Of course, companies spend tons of money by conducting personality tests. So there's assessments that they'll have potential candidates go through in order to assess personality traits that they think are beneficial to them performing well. But you can indirectly get at some of these personality traits by looking at things like college degree and college grades, right? So someone who has a high level of conscientiousness likely has a college degree and likely did really well in college, right? And so they got really good grades. And so that's sort of a proxy, right, that employers use in order to get a sense of some of the traits that they have that correlate with work performance. That's why it's very important for you all to do well in college and in your courses. Another way in which people differ is in their core self-evaluation. Right? And so you want to increase an employee's core self-evaluation. This will improve their performance on the job. And this is something also you can manage for. And we talked about ways, for example, that you can increase a person's self-esteem or their self-efficacy. Emotional intelligence is another feature that people differ on. And it's, again, another aspect of a person that can improve performance. Values and attitudes are also, and we're going to talk about that more in this section of the lecture, but values and attitudes do differ among people, and that impacts performance. And of course, we talked about ways in which a person's perceptions are distorted through things like stereotyping, implicit bias, halo effect, etc. And these are also going to impact performance. So on the agenda for today, we are going to continue the discussion in about the ways in which people differ and how that affects performance. So in this first section, we're going to talk about work-related attitudes. Attitudes, there's really three primary, there's really three primary attitudes that organizations focus on. And in fact, it's actually a focus of academic research as well. And attitudes are important because attitudes affect behavior, and you're concerned about behavior. And we'll talk about the behaviors that organizations pay attention to. So an example of a work-related attitude, an important one, is employee engagement. And employee engagement is about the degree to which an employee is immersed in the activity that they're doing. How immersed are you in the job that you're doing? Do you get a lot of energy from your job? Is there a lot of enthusiasm for the job that you do? If there is, that's a mark of high engagement. But if you sort of checked out, of your job, and there's not a lot of excitement, that's a sign that there's a lack of engagement. And there's ways in which you can manage for this to increase employee engagement, and having an engaged workforce is important. And one of the ways of doing that is creating a culture that values employee development, that recognizes their achievements and their contributions to the organization, and establishes trust among the workers and between workers, employees, and management. And so managers can sort of build on these ideas by providing the resources necessary so that employees can improve their skills on the job, can improve their contribution and their value to the organization, and essentially they can provide leadership. And these are different ways that you can increase employee engagement. Another attitude that's important, and of course, attitudes is a sentiment you have towards a specific object, and this is something that we defined in the first lecture. And so the attitudes we're talking about here, of course, are attitudes that you have toward the job, right? So attitudes that employees hold toward their job. And so another one of these attitudes is satisfaction. And this is really just the extent to which you feel positively or negatively about various aspects of your work. And so, it could be the actual test itself. So the actual task that you perform in your job. It could be how you feel about the way, the amount that you get paid, whether you are, sorry about that. I don't know why, but when I do these pre-recorded lectures. The system is not as robust as the live system, and it continues to crash on me. So I apologize for that little blip there. But anyways, we are, and let me just make sure that we are, yes, back in business here, and we are. Okay, hopefully this doesn't crash again on me. All right, so we're talking about the attitude someone has toward their job and how satisfied they are with it. And job satisfaction is just the degree to which you feel positively or negatively about various aspects of your work, such as the amount of pay that you get, the tasks that you perform, the promotions that you receive, or really the lack of promotion. So if you are, going along the career going along the career ladder, and the organization is recognizing the ways in which you contribute, and increase in ways, the ways in which your skills are improving, and they're recognizing that by offering you promotions. So how you feel about that affects your overall job satisfaction, how you feel about the coworkers, the people that you work with, and of course, the supervision that you receive. And there are lots of things that correlate with job satisfaction. So people who are satisfied with their job have a much stronger motivation to do their job. They're more involved in their work, and they have greater degrees of life satisfaction. All of these also impact job satisfaction in the reverse, right? So, so people who are satisfied in their life tend to be more satisfied in their job. And some of the important effects that job satisfaction produces, and we'll talk more about this, but obviously people who are satisfied with their job will call in sick a lot less often. So absenteeism will go down, tardiness will go down, and levels of stress will go down. And then, okay. And so the last attitude that we're going to talk about is something called organizational commitment. And this is really the degree to which an employee identifies with the organization and is committed to its goals. And of course, there's a positive relationship between organizational commitment and job satisfaction, performance, turnover, etc. So this is also something that you're going to want to manage for. This is another attitude that not only organizations are very concerned about, but this is a focus of academic research, trying to figure out ways in which to increase organizational commitment and what the effects of increase in organizational commitment are. Now, attitudes are important because attitudes affect behaviors, right? And so ultimately, an organization is concerned about the behaviors of its employees. And so some of the behaviors that these attitudes affect that are going to be important to management and to the organization are behaviors such as performance and productivity. So performance is really just what the expectations of your job are. And obviously this is going to vary, depending on the kind of job you do. Sometimes performance and productivity are not very easy to measure. So like if you're in sales, productivity and performance is a simple matter. You can maybe just check, how many sales they actually received or the amount of revenue they were able to bring in. My job, it's somewhat easy to measure performance. And so So although I teach, the primary responsibility of professors is to conduct social science research. Obviously for professors in social science fields. And so the way it typically works for professors is that their performance is measured based on the amount of publications they're able to produce, right? And so my job responsibility essentially is to conduct scientific studies, which results in reporting the result of those studies in a scientific paper that gets published in a scientific journal. And so when you get hired at a university, they'll be very clear in order to reach tenure in this position. And that's really sort of like the first goal, the first significant goal that you want to reach as a professor. They'll say you have to, maybe make 5 publications. And you'll have a certain amount of time to achieve that, let's say 5 years. And then, among those publications, they either all or some percentage of them have to be in the highest quality scientific journals. And so that's just a way of measuring performance. Other behaviors that management and organizations are concerned with are things like absenteeism and turnover. This is important because it costs money for companies to hire new employees. It costs money, it costs a lot of time, and the average of some of the statistics that are cited in your textbook are that the average employee, no, I don't want those notes. The average employee, the cost to hire the average employees is something like $4,500. So there's a cost attached to having to replace employees. Obviously, when employees are calling in sick, right, you got to make up for their absence in some way in order to get through the work you need to get done for that day. Organizational citizenship behaviors, OCBs, is another area, an important area of research and focus of organizations. And that's the degree to which workers sort of go above and beyond their normal expected duties, right? And so you may not get paid to help your fellow employees, but if you're going out of your way to help them, that's an example of an organizational citizenship behavior. If just another example would be just taking care of company property, right? Making sure things are, not damaged, you don't abuse the machinery that the company might have, et cetera. And then counterproductive work behaviors would be the opposite of that. So I'm sure most of you have likely encountered toxic workers, right? People who maybe just sort of speak badly about other workers in the organization, or just speak poorly about the organization in general, or are actually abusive. These are all examples of counterproductive work behaviors, and they undermine the goals that organizations are trying to achieve. And it creates all of that negativity creates toxic work environments. That toxic environment spreads, right? And so it's something that managers are very concerned about. It's something that obviously they want to prevent. And so this is certainly something that they manage for. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this in the first half of the lecture, but obviously the workforce, employees, individuals differ along lots of these social categories. And the degree to which people are different in these categories or the same is the level of diversity within the organization. So examples of this are categories like age and gender, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, capabilities, socioeconomic background. Workplaces today are becoming increasingly diverse, right? And so this is an issue that managers have to confront. And there are benefits to diversity, and there are also drawbacks to diversity. There will be resistance. I mean, the demographics of the United States in particular are changing. The demographics are leading towards an increase in diversity. So organizations will be faced with increasing degrees of diversity within their workforce. So this is something that management does have to confront. They will be up against resistance to that diversity. So we'll talk a little bit about that. One way to think about diversity, though, is captured in this, what's called a diversity wheel. And some of the things that I'll highlight here are, sorry about that. So in the, let me see if I can get my pointer, I can't. This is the limitations of this system of doing these pre-recorded lectures. Okay. All right. Anyways. All right. So, so you can see there's sort of different dimensions along which diversity exists, right? And so personality. So you can see at the sort of core of this wheel where you have personality and internal dimensions. These differences are differences really that exert a pretty powerful and sustained effect throughout your life, right? So we mentioned as part of the definition of personality, these are features about people that rarely change, right? Or change, either don't change at all or change to a very small degree, right? So this is going to, so whatever effects they produce, those effects are going to persist. Same thing with these, what's called here internal dimensions. These are also effects that will persist. As you get to the external dimensions, these are characteristics that people acquire. They can discard them. They can modify them. And so throughout your life, these are areas in which things will change, right? So obviously you can always move. So your geographic location might change. Your marital status might change. Your appearance is going to change. Habits that you adopt will change. And then in this most outer layer of the diversity wheel are differences that you acquire based on your relationship to the organization you're employed with. And so that's just sort of ways in which you can make sense of all the ways in which people differ. And then so I sort of already mentioned this, but there are certain trends that are happening within workforces throughout the United States. There's just in general an increase in level of diversity along lots of different categories. Certainly there's change, right? And so, for example, age, millennials will replace baby boomers as the largest adult generation in the US. It says by the time you read this, it's right. So this is something that's already happened. Women have been increasingly entering the workforce. So they represent a much larger proportion of the workforce. the United States population is becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. That is a trend that is continuing. And so that diversity in the US demographics will be reflected within organizations. Workplaces are becoming more inclusive now regarding sexual orientation. There's also people with different physical and mental abilities. So this slide points out that 19% of civilian Americans have a physical or mental disability. That's 1 in 5, so that's a pretty significant share. There's changes in educational levels. Right now, currently, there's a mismatch between the level of education that people have and what's needed by the workforce. There's an ever-increasing need for workers to have a STEM background, right? And so the workplace is becoming increasingly technological, right? And so all of these sort of scientific and technological skills are of increasing importance. But, you know, there are lots of benefits to diversity. There are drawbacks as well. Regardless of the benefits and the drawbacks, the environment is becoming increasingly diverse. And so that's going to be reflected in the organization. So this is something that managers have to confront. And the organization will be increasingly diverse, and but organizations, there will be resistance within the organization to that increase in diversity, right? And part of the barriers, some of the different barriers that exist that will resist that increase in diversity are things like stereotypes and prejudices. So we talked a little bit about that in the first half of the lecture. People in majority groups will fear discrimination against them, right? And so if there are efforts, and we talked about the Rooney Rule in the first lecture, which is an attempt by the NFL to increase diversity among their executive and top coaching ranks. There may be a resistance to that from, let's say, white coaches and white executives who think that maybe they will be unfairly treated. I don't know if that exists, but the logic of that is what prevents other policies in other organizations from being implemented in order to increase the diversity among the ranks in their organization where that diversity lacks. So management will face resistance. You know, there may be also a climate of negativity around diversity within the organization. You know, people just may generally believe that diversity is a bad thing. If there is this persistent belief that an increase in diversity will just bring an increase in conflict, and we want to avoid conflict at all costs, then this may create a climate of negativity regarding diversity efforts. And so, you know, these are things that managers will be confronted with as they try and deal with an increase in diverse society and how their workplaces reflect that increase in diversity. And so the last topic that we are going to cover is stress and how stress is going to impact behavior. And so stress here is defined as the tension that people will experience when they're uncertain about their ability to perform, you know, some given task, some given demand, because those tasks or demands may seem too overwhelming, right? And there's lots of areas within an organization and within individuals that will be the cause of that. And so there's certainly individual differences among employees regarding their susceptibility to stress. There are what's called a type A personality. These are people who are overachievers, right? They are focused on perfection, right? And so those very high standards set them up for a greater chance of disappointment. And that disappointment, when they do not reach their very lofty goals, can be the source of stress. There are people who just naturally, they just have some aspect of their biology that makes them worry about things a lot more. So they experience a higher degree of stress. There was an actual gene that was uncovered that is responsible for increasing the amount of stress people with this particular gene have. This gene causes people to experience a higher degree of stress. And so there'll be individual differences in the way people experience stress or their susceptibility to stress. Of course, the job itself can be the source of stress. Working as a researcher, it's an extremely competitive environment. It does produce a lot of stress because your job is going to require you to publish scientific articles within journals that have an acceptance rate that is very, very low, right? And so, your job requires you to get published in a particular journal. And that journal only publishes, less than 5% of the articles that it receives, right? And so it's very sort of high stakes. And I know that a lot of professors who are up for tenure, who are trying to achieve tenure within their organization, experience a very high degree of stress. A lot of professors leave the field because of that. So it's definitely an issue I know within my field. It's an issue within many fields in many jobs. So there's ways in which, though, you can manage that. Obviously, you can change some of the requirements and recognize different accomplishments in different ways, in which people can effectively or more effectively manage and handle without the production of all of that stress. Stress can also come from things like role demands. Role conflict is, let me just, I have to, so part of this system with the pre-recorded lectures requires me to run an application on my phone to keep my notes straight. I don't have access to my notes, and so forgive me if I have these weird pauses in the middle of my lecture. But anyways, so there was an example that I thought was good, and it doesn't appear that I have that. Okay, well, anyways, so role demands, though, so something like role conflict will just be conflict that a worker experiences when the different roles that they have to fill in their lives come in conflict. So it could be the case that your role as an employee might conflict with your role as a parent because the demands, let's say, of the job are interfering with your ability maybe to, I don't know, bring your kids to school, things like this. And let's see, so another, I think, important source of job-related stress is group demands. And so this is the stress created by coworkers and managers. And so we talked a little bit about this in an earlier slide, but if your coworkers can create a toxic environment that increases the amount of stress that everyone within there experiences, right? And so, so the attitudes that your coworkers will have toward their job will have an impact on the level of stress that you experience while working with them. And of course, the environment that's created by the organization, the kind of culture that's created, if it's a, sort of a high risk, high pressure work culture that doesn't consider, how realistic some of these goals are, or time constraints and things like this, and just the psychological resources available to the employees in order to accomplish these tasks. If there's a disregard for all of that, that can create the kind of culture that makes working there very, very stressful. So in this last slide, just want to confirm it was the last slide. These are ways in which we can reduce stress within an organization. They're known as buffers that managers can make use of in order to reduce the stress that workers experience. And this is obviously something that you need to manage for. Stress, in some ways, there's a good form of stress because it can motivate you to focus on the most important tasks so that you can get whatever work you need to get done in a very efficient way. And so it's a way of increasing productivity. But if the stress becomes overwhelming and overloads you, right, then it has all sorts of negative impacts. An important one, I believe, is the fact that it creates an experience in your life that is very negative. And since we spend so much time at our jobs, this is, it can create a negative life, right? It could really take a toll on your overall life satisfaction if your job is very stressful and creates all of these negative emotions, right? Since you spend so much time at your job. So that's one area which is important. The other area is that it affects performance and productivity for the organization. So obviously this is something that you want to manage for. So building resilience is an important way of combating stress. So resilience is just the way in which a person has resources to bounce back from the stressful experience that they had to endure. The organization can have employee assistance programs or wellness programs, which maybe helps people relax and gives them skills to better cope with the stress that they experience. In one of my classes, I think the Tuesday class, a student brought up mindfulness, which is something that's becoming very, very popular among workplaces. It's becoming popular within even educational settings. So in the classroom, advocates of mindfulness view it as this really sort of revolutionary approach to psychological well-being. And so mindfulness is it's one way to build up your degree of resiliency. It's a way of building up your ability to cope and rebound from stress. So implementing programs like this, which have been shown to be effective in combating stress and being buffers against stress, These are things that can reduce stress overall within the organization. Another way is to make jobs more interesting. And so if you hate your job and you are going through something stressful, you're going to interpret that stress as nothing but negative. But if your job is more interesting, right? If you find the job more satisfying, if you're more engaged in your job, right, then the stresses that you experience might be interpreted more as challenges that you look forward to being able to overcome, right? And so whatever task that you are confronted with may not be interpreted really as stress, but interpreted more positively if you find that the job that you're doing is a lot more interesting. So anyway, so we will end it here. Have a great rest of your weekend. We're supposed to have great weather this weekend, so take advantage of that if you can. And I will see everyone next week.